Today's brief talk is what I'm calling It's Not About the Elbow. You know, I think for most of my adult life, starting in my late teens really, I've had even when I wasn't aware that I was searching for this sort of thing, I had a deep interest in trying to figure out all those things that triggered me, that created reactions in me, that dissociated me, that put me in patterns of repetition where I kind of got trapped in this pattern of loop of repeating thinking, repeating actions in my guts, repeating actions in my anxieties and so forth. All those things that were dysregulating me, I had an interest in learning about and trying to overcome. I didn't know those were the things that I was working on in the early years, but they were. And it all started with meditation practice. And when I first started practicing meditation, I would start to get some level of regulation. But I also became more aware of my dysregulated patterns, which was very uncomfortable to face. And it really hasn't been, even all these decades of meditation practice hadn't really started to become more sticky and more lasting until I brought along the other 5 friends of the 6 keys of self-regulation. That really started to make my meditation practice more sticky, more lasting. Because when you start with self-awareness, we start with just the body, or sensory awareness, the body feeling solid, tangible, and differentiated, grounded in a more gross aspects of our sensory awareness, and we become aware of those more acutely. They're right there in our face, and it's not comfortable initially to feel those things. But as we practice more deeply, our awareness can become more focused and more subtle. And again, we can become much more aware of our dysregulations, even though we're starting to have an impact on them. And our sensations become more subtle and more refined. Our vibratory energy becomes more vibratory and flowing. We become more interconnected. And again, for me, some of that it stimulated insomnia, it stimulated anxiety sometimes. But it also, I knew even right from the beginning, there was this potential, I could feel it, even fleeting. So then I started adding movement. I started adding breath. I started adding more, different ways of stair-stepping my attention through my body. And that started to ground me more, so I didn't feel so ship without a rudder-ish, if you will. And what I started to notice as I refined my awareness and also added enlivening my vagus nerve, I started to feel the breathing through my guts. I started to feel all of these other patterns of movement coming together slowly, fluidly. I started to really rewire the nervous system because the movement started to help bringing that into more practicality. The breathing started to make it kind of outside of my normal habitual ways of prating. And I started to break up what I would call in myself the trauma loop. It's not something I coined. There is a term called the trauma loop, and which I started to overcome these triggers strongly, these reactions in myself, the dissociation and the repetition and the entrapments that I would fall into and get stuck in these physiological, and thinking loops. And I started to feel much more resilient with these things. And every time I tap into the sensory awareness within these patterns, with my other keys, I would begin to much more complete and thoroughly affect my physical and my emotional well-beings. My daily 6 keys begin to become into more practical things. When I was walking, I would go through roadmaps, sensory roadmaps. I'd go into breathing more slowly. I'd walk and I'd touch these areas of breathing in different areas and start to feel them. I started to just bring them more into a regulatory pattern. And as my awareness got more and more refined, it became a very potent tool for my emotions and more for my physical, illogical, and healing capabilities. I began to significantly reduce. And the big thing was, it started to last. I wouldn't just feel it during my practice, I started to feeling it outside the practice. And my sensory awareness got stronger by incorporating it into all these other things. Because what happens? You hear something on the news, you hear a political comment that triggers you. It starts to trigger your thinking. But then you go, okay, what am I feeling in my head, in my arms, in my legs, in my torso? And all of a sudden the thinking pattern shifts. And you start to short circuit those loops that you would fall into. And as we continue to practice, particularly with sensory awareness as our guide, we the more quickly, and this is the whole thing, the more quickly and the more powerfully we get that response of regulation that we're looking for. So, practice makes perfect, in a sense, is basically what I said. So thanks so much for listening. It's hard to hear that when we don't feel regulated right away. It's hard to hear it and keep going. But we get little signs along the way. Grab a hold of those signs. Grab a hold of those, oh, I just had this one moment of opening, of relief, of calmness, of centeredness, of connectedness with everything. And then back to the same old, same old. And we just dip back and forth until we stay longer and longer.